What is up? Good Mike Work back at you with episode 400. I cannot believe it is my 400th episode. Where the hell does the time go? I just want to thank everybody for all your support throughout the years. A lot of you have been with me right from the start. It's been a lot of fun, and we've seen a lot of things together, and I thought I should come up and try to do something special for my 400th episode. Nothing too crazy here. I have done a couple of top 10 lists in the past before, and it is a segment that I want to try to do more of on my channel. So when coming up with ideas to do for my 400th video, I'm right off the heels of a Q&A that was just uploaded a few days back, so I knew I couldn't do that, so I figured, you know what, how about a top 10 list? And how about a list of all of my favorite wrestlers of all time? So that's what we're going to talk about here, just me rambling on about all of my favorite wrestlers and taking a trip down memory lane and looking at some of the most memorable moments from all of their careers. So if this is your first time stumbling across my channel, this should be a pretty fun first video to take a look at. Please click that subscribe button and please like this video and engage it and comment and share it as much as possible. We all know the problems that YouTube has been having lately, and a lot of my views in my videos are taking a pretty big hit. So I can use all the help I can get, so please like it and tell your friends and subscribe and all of that good stuff. Most of you know I have a website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com. Please check that out. There's a downloadable version of this commentary available there. You can also see all my previous videos and my past posts. You can buy merchandise, all sorts of stuff. You can listen to me on iTunes and Stitcher Radio as well. If you do listen to me on those sites, I ask you to please leave a review or a rating or something like that just to give myself some traction on those other platforms. And then, of course, here on YouTube, just subscribe. I also have a second channel. You can take a look at that if you like. I'm very active on Twitter, as most of you know, at GoodMicWork, so please follow me if you have not yet already. And you can like my Facebook page as well. Links to all this stuff is in the description below. I don't want to bore you with any more of that stuff, so let's move right on to this top 10. I do want to mention briefly here that this top 10 list is just my top 10 favorite wrestlers. I cannot stress that enough. I'm not claiming that these 10 gentlemen are the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that these are the 10 guys that entertain me the most in professional wrestling. If you disagree with anybody on this list, you are more than welcome to make your own top 10 video and send me the link. But this list is really just based on personal memories. It was really tough to narrow it down to 10. As a matter of fact, I have a huge honorable mentions segment near the end here of all these other guys that I really wanted to include in the top 10, but I just couldn't. I had to narrow it down. So I came up with the best top 10 that I could think of, even though I wanted to include a lot more guys. I think I did my memories justice by picking the guys that I picked, because I have a lot of great memories about all of them, and it's just all about how they touch you personally. For those of you who have been listening to me for a long time, you already know who number one is going to be. So there's going to be a little bit less suspense, I suppose, for you. But my other 10 names I think you will enjoy, and I think a lot of you, just judging from what I've heard from you guys over the years and some of the conversations and interactions I've had with all of you, I think most of you are going to agree with a lot of names on this list. You know why? Because you guys are cool. So without further ado, I give you Good Mike Work's top 10 favorite wrestlers of all time. Number 10, Chris Jericho. As of the making of this video in 2017, Chris Jericho is still relevant in WWE and professional wrestling. This is a guy that I have admired ever since he first got his start 25-something years ago. And it was right around the time where I was becoming a tape trader and starting to discover other independent wrestling, not only in this country, but all over the world. And I was able to find out who Chris Jericho was because of his work in Mexico and Japan. And I've said many times throughout the years on my commentaries that I always respect more, I think, the type of wrestlers that traveled the road that Chris Jericho traveled. On top of that, Chris Jericho has been a master of reinventing himself. Very few guys in the business can do what he did, to where his character and his personality and who he is as a wrestler evolves, not only in his personality, but his in-ring style as well, because Chris Jericho is now in his mid-40s, and thanks to DDP Yoga, he's still able to do lion salts and shit like that in there, but he's still not the Chris Jericho that he was 15 years ago. So he's done a really good job of adapting his style to whatever era he's in and however old he is at the time. So Jericho deserves a lot of credit for that, for staying relevant for so long. And so I think he really made my top 10 a lot because of that reason. If Jericho would have retired in 2005 when he got booted out of the WWE after he lost that match to John Cena and he never came back, I don't know if Jericho would make my top 10. But he came back and he kind of turned heel, had that great run with Shawn Michaels in 2008, won a couple of more world titles, and here he is today in his role as kind of a joke, but at the same time, he's still involved in world title programs and working with top talent, and that's a testament to how great of a performer Chris Jericho is, not only in the ring, but outside of the ring. He's a great representation for WWE and pro wrestling in general because he's very well liked. He's got a lot of charisma. He has outside projects. He's in a band. He does TV spots. He's just a good guy to send out there. I've said that a lot about him, that when you send somebody like Chris Jericho, who's well spoken, he's intelligent, he represents pro wrestling well, and he's not really the stereotype that people have in their head of what pro wrestling is and who pro wrestlers are. So whenever Jericho is on TV representing wrestling in any way, I always feel proud. Now, Jericho is, not perfect. I've read all of his books, and he's very upfront and honest with some of the things that he's done wrong in his life. But that's what life is all about. It's about experience, and it's about learning from your mistakes. And Chris Jericho, even the mistakes that he's made, has not been that bad. When you think about wrestlers and some of the trouble that they found themselves in with the law or drugs or violence or any sort of issues they have, Jericho, was never to that degree. And some of my greatest memories of Chris Jericho, like I said earlier, when I first discovered him, becoming a tape trader, I was able to see some of his matches from Japan and some of his matches from Mexico. And then I got my hands on Smoky Mountain tapes, and I was able to see him and Lance Storm. And then when he showed up in ECW, I thought that was pretty awesome, and I was hoping he would go to the WWE. But back then, WWE was not in that mindset. They did not really keep tabs on what was going on out there and where the great talent was all over the world because they were in their own little WWE bubble. And WCW had guys over there that recognized talent like that, and they were to bring all these guys in, like Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit, guys that for some reason WWE just didn't have any interest in at the time. And Jericho's tenure in WCW wasn't that great, but he still had some pretty cool moments. I mean, he was Cruiserweight champion, he was television champion, he had some pretty memorable feuds with Dean Malenko and Rey Mysterio, and that whole debacle with Goldberg that was setting up for a pretty big pay-per-view match but never wound up happening, and Jericho just got beat up in the aisleway or something. So he had some disappointments in WCW, and when you saw him kind of evolve and mature even more during his time with WCW, by the time he was going to head to WWE, it was going to be great. People were talking about him going to the WWE a complete year prior to him even showing up there. And nobody's ever had a better debut in WWE, in my opinion, than Chris Jericho. For him to burst on the scene like that after only really being a mid-carder in WCW, WWE knew they could do something great with him, and they immediately put him right in a main segment with The Rock, the hottest guy in the business, interacting with him, cutting a promo on his first night in the WWE. And it was a kind of a slow, rocky start for Jericho, but eventually he got rolling, developed a great legacy. He admired guys that won and wore the Intercontinental title, and I think he's won the Intercontinental title more than anybody. For me, that's what I can relate to. For me, that's why I like Chris Jericho so much, is because I was the same way. I liked those type of wrestlers. I liked the Savages, the Steamboats, the Bret Harts, the Mr. Perfects, guys like that. And for him to admire those type of champions, and then he wore the very same belt as them. And not to mention, he got to work with one of his idols, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, around, like WrestleMania 25. So that was very cool. But his run in WWE, all of the titles that he won, all the moments he had, the great matches he had with guys like Triple H, with The Rock, with Chris Benoit. I witnessed live one of their Intercontinental title matches where the belt changed hands. I think Benoit beat Jericho on an episode of SmackDown. I was there for that. It was in Richmond, Virginia. I was at SummerSlam 2000 in Raleigh, North Carolina to watch those two guys wrestle live, and that was a pretty awesome thing to see, especially since neither guy had really been in the WWE that long. Seeing what WWE could do with some of this WCW talent was really exciting for the time. Think of all the awesome promos that he had back during the Attitude Era. I mean, he was keeping up with guys like The Rock and Austin and DX and some of the great interviewers and talkers that we had in the WWE at that time, and Jericho was one of the most entertaining guys. And we could see shades of that in WCW. Who can ever forget when he read his list of holds on Nitro? That's when you first started to realize that Jericho is a really quick-thinking, witty type of guy that is exactly what you need in pro wrestling. That's why guys like Bobby the Brain Heenan were such brilliant announcers and commentators, because of the way they could just rattle off shit off the top of their head that was completely entertaining and sounded like they rehearsed it for days. So Jericho definitely didn't have the size, but the rest of his look was very good. He was great in the ring. He was a great promo cutter. He was very close to a complete and total package. Athletically, I don't think he was quite as good or as light on his feet as someone like Shawn Michaels or Kurt Hennig, but he was still very agile. He could do moonsaults and top rope dives and all that kind of stuff. He wasn't quite as graceful and smooth as some other guys, but still, he had such a good balance, I think, of high flying and technical ability, because he was one of the final dungeon graduates. And anybody who learns how to be a professional wrestler in Canada and even trains with the Hearts, when they're done training, they're ready to rock and roll. And Jericho definitely was. An amazing career, well-traveled, tons of titles all over the world. I loved the WWE's DVD on him. As a matter of fact, I reviewed that DVD. I'll put a link up here on the screen. I did that a few years ago. That's one I would actually like to redo. But I loved the way Jericho talked about how much he learned when he traveled to all these different parts of the world, learning how to wrestle and learning different things and applying that experience and that knowledge and using some of those things that he learned to this very day in the ring. It's nice to see these days WWE bringing in some independent talent, Finn Balor's and Kevin Owens and some of the Shield guys and AJ Styles even. Because when you think about the experience that these guys possess, that's the type of experience we really haven't seen since a guy like Chris Jericho. I respect Jericho immensely. He's somebody that I feel I have a lot in common with. I've met him a couple of times, and a really, really crazy story that I've told a few times when a big 18-wheeler tipped over on the interstate the night after Unforgiven 1999, and him and Edge and Christian pulled over to help everybody out, and I ended up spending some time with him, and it was really cool to kind of get to talk to him just a month after he'd come into the WWE. I feel like he's somebody that I could sit down and have a beer with and talk about music or some of our other similar interests. So he's just seems like a cool guy, down-to-earth guy. I like him in the ring. I like him outside of the ring. I like his promo style. I like his charisma. I like his attitude. I like his look. I like the way he's changed his character up throughout the years to keep himself relevant. I think it's brilliant. His books were page turners. I mean, I could not put him down. All three of his books. Listening to somebody like him tell their stories of their experiences in wrestling is always very fun, and he does it in a very entertaining way. And I can see why all those books are bestsellers. So Chris Jericho, my hat's off to you on an awesome career so far. You're still going strong. Looks like you'll be wrapping things up in the next couple of years, but for right now, you are still in the ring, and I couldn't be happier to see you there. It took me a long time to narrow this list down to 10, but at the end of the day, there was no way I could keep Jericho off. Number 9, Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. Like I said in the intro, this is just my personal favorite top 10 wrestlers ever. And Curt Hennig, I'm just putting on there because I really, really loved his time in the WWE as Mr. Perfect and his runs with the Intercontinental title. I have a lot of memories of Curt Hennig that go way back. As a matter of fact, I watched him in the AWA and I was a big fan of his dad. But I don't think I really fell in love with him until he got to the WWE. I watched a lot of his matches from AWA. I watched his match with Nick Bockwinkel. I remember watching that on TV. The big bloodbath they had for the AWA title. I remember when he wound up losing the title to Jerry Lawler and leaving the AWA, and I remember when he made his debut in WWE, and I remember thinking to myself when I saw him, because there was no dirt sheets back then, you didn't really know he was going there, but when he showed up, I was like, I was wondering when they were going to get their hands on him, because WWE eventually gets their hands on everybody, and him leaving definitely seemed inevitable, and when I finally saw him turn up in WWE, I was like, look at that. And then I just started watching his work, and then he kind of changed up a little bit. He got in a little bit better shape. He started wearing the singlet instead of the shorts, and I remember when he first showed up wearing the singlet, I'm like, I don't really like that. And then it turned out to kind of be what his character was all about. I mean, it was so perfect for him. It suited him so well. And I think his look improved a lot in the WWE. Got in a little bit better shape, got himself a tan, grew his hair a little bit longer, changed his ring gear, and then was able to really refine his work in the ring because he was so agile. I like the way that Curt would sell. He would take the most amazing bumps. I don't know where his match with Bret Hart at SummerSlam 1991 would rank on my top 10 favorite wrestling matches of all time, but I would have to think it would be top 3. And even in that match, as injured as he was selling his ass off for Bret Hart. I used to love the way Curt would take those leg sweeps, when anybody would kick him through the legs and he would basically completely spin backwards while holding onto the rope. It looked so good. I've seen his son, I've seen Axel do it a couple of times on Raw. There was just something about the way Curt Hennig performed in the ring that I was drawn to, and I'll talk more about this as we proceed through this countdown of what kind of led me to be attracted to certain guys, but with Hennig, it was all about what he was doing. I loved the drop kicks that he would throw. I loved how fast he was. I loved when somebody would throw him over the top rope, that he would make it look so crazy and so dangerous. Very Dolph Ziggler-ish in his selling, although he's a little bit bigger than Dolph. And Curt Hennig was a guy back when he came into the WWE, I think in 88, it was like late 88 he showed up there. When you look at really good in-ring guys, WWE didn't have that many. I mean, they had Savage, Steamboat was in and out. It was still a big man's game. It was still a lot of Hogan and a lot of Andre and a lot of Warrior. So to see a smaller guy that can work the way Hennig did, I thought was awesome. I loved his series of matches with Bret Hart early on in Hennig's run in the WWE, because they broke up the Hart Foundation once prior to them winning the tag team titles again. They tried to break them off and go singles, and it didn't really work. Well, Bret Hart was used primarily to put guys a little bit higher than him on the card over, and he had some amazing matches with Mr. Perfect. This is before they even feuded for the Intercontinental belt, and before Bret even beat him. You know, Perfect was beating him night after night on the house show circuit and on TV sometimes, and those matches were awesome. Bret Hart even says in his book, he says one of the best matches, if not the best match he's ever had in his career, was a house show match with Curt Hennig, where they were just out there having fun and goofing off, and a tape doesn't even exist of it. But they went out there and tore the house down, and it's one of his favorite matches he's ever had, and nobody even has footage or a picture of it. So there are certain guys that Hennig really worked with well in the ring, but I think Curt could make anybody look good. And when the Ultimate Warrior beat Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6, and they had to have a tournament to find the new Intercontinental Champion, I was rooting for Perfect the whole time, because I was bummed out that he lost. He was undefeated going into WrestleMania 6, I believe, and he took on Brutus Beefcake. And of all people to beat the streak, Brutus Beefcake, Jesus. I was a little bit disappointed by that, because at that time I was a full-blown Curt Hennig fan. So when they had the tournament for the Intercontinental title, I had a feeling he was going to be the one that was going to win it. When I looked at everybody else in there, I'm like, you got to think it's going to be Hennig. And then I think they had the finals with him and Tito, which of course was going to be an amazing match, because Tito Santana had great matches with everybody. And then they threw the little twist in at the very end where Bobby Heenan showed up. And he revealed himself to be Kurt's new manager, which I thought was perfect, no pun intended. And I have to remember, too, I remember watching this episode, I think I've talked about this before, this is the match where I think they forgot to bring the Intercontinental title or something like that, because if I remember right, after Mr. Perfect beat Tito Santana, he was celebrating with the tag team title. The WWE would always use the tag team title in situations like this. They did the same thing with Ric Flair when they were video distorting the WCW belt, but what really had happened is that WCW, I think, sued and were able to get the belt back, so WWE video distorted the belt so the fans on TV couldn't see it, but it was the tag team belt. And here it is, they're having a tournament to crown the new Intercontinental Champion, and they forget to bring the fucking belt. Are you kidding me? They were close to having Curt Hennig be in a world title program as well. If you remember, he started feuding with Hogan. He had the spot on Saturday Night's Main Event where he took the WWE Winged Eagle title and he started breaking it with a hammer and smashing it to bits. I remember being disappointed that they didn't actually put the belt on Curt Hennig. But at that time, he just wasn't somebody that Hogan was going to lose to, which sucked, because Curt Hennig was a million times better in the ring than Hulk. But it's really no big deal, because at the end of the day, I preferred seeing Curt Hennig in the Intercontinental title division more than the World title division, because the Intercontinental title back then was still the workhorse title. You had Savage, you had Steamboat, you had Perfect, you had guys like that holding the belt, and Mr. Perfect was the perfect guy to hold that title. And like I mentioned earlier, that epic match he had with Bret Hart at SummerSlam 1991 is one of my favorite memories of Mr. Perfect ever, and I think that's really when I started respecting him, because of the story of how hurt he was going into that match and how he probably should not have even been wrestling. But like I mentioned earlier, with Bret Hart and Perfect working the house show circuit together, when Curt was on top, Bret put him over and put him over and put him over. So for Curt to insist that he goes in there and at least returns the favor and does the same thing for Bret, making him a champion in Madison Square Garden, I couldn't have been happier and more grateful to Curt Hennig that he actually went through with that match and helped make Bret. And had it not been for that match, who knows how Bret Hart's legacy would have played out, you know, because it was such an epic way to win the title, and it was such a great performance by both guys. And I just remember it fondly, and I remember being so proud of both guys, but especially Hennig. I respected the hell out of Curt Hennig from that point on. So he makes the list really of just how drawn I was to him as a performer and how many memories I have of him, you know, growing up and watching wrestling and seeing him evolve and all of that. So I wish his career could have ended a little bit better. I was always sad that he was kind of in and out in the WWE. Came back at 1994 at WrestleMania 10 only to disappear right after that. Came back in 1995 at the Survivor Series to do commentary, and then teased a return to the ring about a year later only to leave and go to WCW, where he did return to the ring. Won the United States title, joined the NWO, had a couple of matches with Bret Hart and Ric Flair, some of his old WWE rivalries, a time or two, but really his time in WCW was uneventful. And then he was able to return to the WWE, but that didn't last long because of the plane ride from hell. And shortly after that, he passed away of a cocaine overdose. So I really wish the back end of Curt Hennig's career, and his life for that matter, could have gone a little bit better. But, you know, it's my top 10 favorite wrestlers ever. And when I think about Curt Hennig in the ring, I can't not put him on this list. Number 8, Brock Lesnar. A couple of Minnesota boys back to back in my top 10. What is there really to say about Brock Lesnar? He's a beast. He's awesome. You guys all know what Brock Lesnar's capable of. The reason he makes my top 10 is because of how crazy physically impressive he is. I never get bored of seeing Brock Lesnar in the ring, especially when he was young. I cannot tell you how impressed I think I was and the entire wrestling world was with him when he came in. I don't even know if people can appreciate that. You know, when he came in at such a young age, 24 years old or 25 years old, whatever it was, and was doing the things and showing the type of ability and athleticism that he had. And on top of that, he was also credible. Not only was he agile for somebody that was 300 pounds, scary agile, he was also extremely athletic, and he could wrestle for real, and he could hurt you for real. And he was the first guy that came in a long time that you were worried that anybody could defeat. I will never forget one of his first debuts. He started showing up, right after WrestleMania 18, beating the hell out of people, and he started attacking the Hardy Boys first. And there's that one spot on Raw where he's attacking the both of them, and Jeff Hardy picks up a chair. I know you guys know the spot I'm talking about. It's all over YouTube, and I can still hear that chair shot ringing in my head. But Hardy picks up the chair, and he swings that thing like a baseball bat, and it strikes Brock directly in the face. Completely unprotected. Brock didn't put his hands up, nothing. He absorbed the chair shot with his face, and it made a shotgun-like sound that echoed through the entire arena. The fans damn near shit themselves, and Brock just kind of backed up, and his face was smushed in a little bit, and he stayed right on his feet. And it was one of the craziest chair shots I think I've ever seen in my life. It might be up there with the sickest that I've ever seen, and Brock took it like a boss. And that's when I knew that this guy was not to be trifled with, and Jeff Hardy better run for his fucking life. And then to see how dominant he was, he came in, I think he won the King of the Ring, and then he won another match against Rob Van Dam, and then next thing you know, at SummerSlam, 3 months after he debuted, 4 months after he debuted, something like that, he gets a title shot against The Rock in the main event of SummerSlam and beats him cleanly and pretty damn dominantly. It's hard for this guy to get heat unless he's going out there beating up old ladies or something, because he's just way too physically impressive for wrestling fans, especially New York wrestling fans, to boo. And I remember being so shocked. It is a very rare thing for the WWE to bring somebody in and give them the world title within 3 months or 4 months of them being on the roster. That is crazy. And Brock Lesnar did it. He had some awesome matches in the WWE with Kurt Angle and The Undertaker during his first run, and then he wound up leaving in 2004. Now, had he not come back, I probably wouldn't put him on my list just because of how short his run was. As impressive as it was, with everything that he accomplished, winning the King of the Ring, beating The Rock for the title in the main event of SummerSlam, beating Kurt Angle for the title in the main event of WrestleMania the next year, beating The Undertaker in the Hell in the Cell, and having all sorts of great matches every time he stepped in the ring, and showing unbelievable strength. This guy was stronger than a fucking bear. I mean, he was picking up and F5ing the Big Show and shit like that. This guy could F5 a car. He's just scary, ridiculously good. And then he packed his bags and left. Didn't like pro wrestling and left in 2004, and we didn't see him again for 8 years, something like that. And then he came back to the WWE, and he did things like completely rape and destroy and demolish John Cena at SummerSlam for the WWE title, beating him in one of the worst squashes we've ever seen. That is until he himself had a rematch with Goldberg, that is. But he also ended The Undertaker's streak, which to this day is something that, really doesn't really sit well with the fans, just because it's so shocking that somebody was even capable of ending the streak, and the guy that did it was Brock. He's believable. He's scary. He's an ass kicker. He was a champion in UFC. He transitioned into another form of combat and went over to MMA and won the biggest title in the UFC. Had some bad moments too. Did get beat a couple of times in UFC, and then most recently during his comeback, he got nailed with a doping violation, but still, at the end of the day, he was very impressive for a UFC fighter and somebody going from professional wrestling to UFC and actually doing decently or doing well and winning a few fights and winning a championship, I thought was a pretty big deal. He was definitely a trendsetter. I mean, he changed a lot of things in wrestling. He changed the way wrestlers get paid. I mean, Brock Lesnar probably gets paid more than anybody else on the roster, and he works 2 or 3 times a year. WWE thought he was credible enough to end a nearly quarter-century-long winning streak of The Undertaker. He was able to work a match for the UFC while being being under contract at WWE, which is virtually unheard of. He is such a big draw in the WWE, and he's done some things in certain ways that nobody else has been able to do before. I've got to put him on the list. You know, I always think of things like, you know, how wrestling fans sometimes get shit from people who aren't wrestling fans, and some people look down on professional wrestling. You know, if you're ever trying, not that I would even try to convince somebody to like professional wrestling, but if I ever wanted to explain to someone or show them why I liked it, I would probably have to show them a few Brock Lesnar matches and say, does any of that shit that he's doing look fake to you? So fuck off. At the end of the day, I don't know if I have the personal love for Brock Lesnar the way I love some of the other guys on this countdown, because I'm kind of indifferent about Brock Lesnar. I don't think Brock Lesnar really deep down gives too much of a shit about the fans. And to be honest with you, I really don't care about him either if he doesn't care about us. But as far as the enjoyment I got from watching his matches and how scary credible I thought the guy was and how he's done some things in wrestling, like I said, that nobody's ever done, he made the list. So number 8 goes to Brock. Number 7, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. How in the world can I leave Nate off of this list? He has an argument for being the greatest professional wrestler of all time, for everything that he's accomplished in his career and how long he's been in the business. And I have a ton of memories and a ton of respect for Ric Flair's career. He recently followed me on Twitter, actually, a couple weeks ago, which was awesome. I have a few wrestlers that follow me, but that was one of my mark-out ones for sure when I saw that. Sorry I couldn't put you higher on this list, Rick. This was a very tough list to make for me, trying to narrow down my 10 favorite wrestlers ever, but there's no way I was going to leave you out. Ric Flair's been wrestling since 1972, I believe, somewhere around there, so he's basically been in the business for 45 years. His legacy is living on with his amazing daughter and the awesome work that she's doing currently in WWE, which is really nice to see Ric Flair still having an influence on the business to this day. My memories of him, too many to list for a top 10 video. But when you think back to where Ric Flair got his start in the early 70s, I think he broke in with Billy Robinson and Vern Gagne up in Minnesota, and he was kind of a pudgier guy, and, you know, it took him a while to kind of develop that Nature Boy Ric Flair character, and it wasn't until he came down to the South and started working for the NWA and the Carolinas where he really made himself famous and really made himself a star. He was the one guy in another territory that was on equal footing almost, I think, with somebody like Hulk Hogan in the WWF. He was on the cover of every magazine, winning countless awards, a bona fide world champion, and for a long time, you know, him and Hogan were sitting atop the wrestling world, and Ric Flair, I think, was more respected than Hulk because of how he could work in the ring. Ric Flair was a very fun wrestler to watch. Wasn't the most technically sound guy, I think, ever, but as far as his ability to work a long match, the amazing shape that he was in, some of the spots that he could do, and the ability to tell a story and really work well with certain opponents, nobody was better than Ric Flair. I think of the matches he had with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, with Harley Race, with Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, and Barry Windham, and Sting. Jesus, all the matches they had together, and the great legacy that he built for himself in the NWA and the NWA territory, and then finally coming into the WWE in the early 90s there when he finally had the dispute with the then WCW and Jim Herd during the buyout and the selling from Crockett and transferring of power over to Turner and all that shit. And Ric Flair got the hell out of there and went into the WWE. And upon arrival, within 4, 5, 6 months, something like that, he's the WWE champion, winning the 1992 Royal Rumble. Arguably my favorite Royal Rumble of all of them. For me personally, it's a tie between 1992 and 2001, but that 92 Rumble was unbelievable and such an awesome match with the awesome prize at the end. The WWE title was actually on the line in that Rumble, something that we had not seen up until that point. The title had been held up once or twice, but we had never seen a world title won in a Battle Royal or a Royal Rumble or anything like that, and Ric Flair was the first guy to do it. So the fact that he came in after being such a big name in the NWA and one of Vince McMahon's biggest competitors as far as, you know, the talent really helping NWA compete with WWE to begin with, Ric Flair was one of those guys. So the fact that Vince brought him in and put the world title on him right away was pretty cool. He had some great matches in WWE. That match at WrestleMania 8 with Randy Savage was pretty damn good, and that amazing performance he had in the Royal Rumble match itself, because I think he entered that match at number 3, so he was out there for over an hour. His title reign was pretty short-lived because he did drop it to Savage at WrestleMania 8, but eventually would win it back and then coughed it up to Brett just a few weeks later, and then he was out of the WWE. So he was only there about a year and a half, maybe even less. But what he accomplished in that time was pretty good. He did a lot in that year span, and it was a nice little feather in his cap. You know, as far as if he wants to be considered one of the greatest of all time, you have to be able to win belts everywhere. And for him to be on top of the NWA and WCW and then jump over to WWE and be on top there, and then go back to WCW, which is what he did in 1993 after he lost the Loser Leaves Town match to Kurt Hennig on Raw the night after the Royal Rumble, 1993. He jumped back to WCW and was world champion within a matter of months. So his body of work is pretty damn impressive. My memories of Rick and the Four Horsemen are etched in my brain, especially some of the stuff they did in the mid and late 80s. That group that they formed with Tully and Arn and J.J. Dillon and Barry Windham and Lex Luger were in and out, and there was some rotating Horseman members, but that core group there with J.J., Arn, Tully, and Flair was one of my, if not my favorite faction in all of professional wrestling history. It was so fun to watch those guys. And they weren't to be fucked with. At the time, they were heels that were actually cheered by the crowd. I even remember at WrestleMania 8, the same show that Savage and Flair match took place on, there was fans in the crowd holding up a big bed sheet with the words Four Horsemen on it, which was awesome, especially to see something like that on one of Vince's TV shows. So Ric Flair's legacy in the Four Horsemen and how popular they got, that stretched worldwide. Everybody knew who the Four Horsemen was. They were all over the magazines and the NWA, and it was really hard to miss those guys. And not only did Ric Flair pave the way for a lot of singles wrestlers and a lot of future champions that would come after him, they also paved the way for factions. I mean, without the Four Horsemen, I don't know if we ever have an NWO or a DX or any sort of dominant faction to that level. The Four Horsemen kind of invented all that stuff and took it to heights that allowed the future to have a lot of factions and dominant groups and shit like that. When you put a whole bunch of champions together, I loved that. I loved it when Tully was the TV champion and Ric Flair was the world champion. Tully and Arn would also be tag team champions together, and it was a pretty impressive stable because they always had great wrestlers in there. There were a few duds. I wasn't a fan of Luger being in the Horsemen. Definitely wasn't a fan of Paul Roma being in the Horsemen. And Sting being a part of the Four Horsemen always confused me, so there have been a few that haven't been so great, but Pillman was a Horseman. He was awesome. Benoit was a Horseman. Malenko was a Horseman. I miss those days, and I miss that group. As a matter of fact, they released a Four Horsemen DVD, didn't they? And I remember that documentary being really good. Everybody was interviewed for that thing. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard and Barry Windham and all of them. And I remember really enjoying that DVD. I should pull that out and watch it again. I haven't seen it in a few years. But what I think made Ric Flair himself great is that he was so fucking versatile. He was charismatic as hell. His interviews are the stuff of legend. He was able to take a lot of pieces from past gimmicks and past wrestlers like Gorgeous George, Buddy Rogers, and Nick Bockwinkel, and a lot of those type of gimmicks that were, you know, the suit-wearing, well-spoken Rolex watches, sunglasses, you know, kind of carrying the belt with pride and dignity and honor. He really looked and dressed like a world champion. That's why I was always such a big fan of guys like Flair and Bockwinkel, because I loved the way they carried themselves. They were the very definition of class, and Ric Flair could cut a promo better than anyone. And then when you put him in the ring and realize how good he is in the ring too, and how capable he is, and the great matches he had with all those guys I listed earlier, and the great moments and all the world title wins that he had. Not only as a heel, but also a babyface. I mean, Ric Flair had a pretty damn impressive career, and it's one that I'm never going to forget. I mean, I don't really even have a memory. I don't have a professional wrestling memory in which Ric Flair does not exist. I can't say that about Hogan. I remember watching wrestling before Hulkamania was even born. But Ric Flair is a guy that has been around during all of this stuff, and his longevity has spanned so many years, all the way up until most recently. I know I can give Ric Flair a hard time sometimes with some of the decisions he's made in his personal life that might personally annoy me, but it's never taken away for how much I respected his wrestling career. I really, really wish that 2008 with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania would have been his last match. That would have been the cherry on top of what I thought was already a pretty awesome career. So I would think I will always be disappointed that Ric Flair went to TNA and got back in the ring after that great send-off. I mean, I don't recall too many times where I cried harder during a wrestling show than I did when Ric Flair retired from wrestling, because he's such an emotional guy. It was such a perfect time for him to step down. He went into the WWE Hall of Fame, had his retirement match with another guy that can have the argument for being the best in-ring worker of all time, and the match itself for Ric Flair at his age to put on a match that was that memorable. I thought the finish to that match and the drama and everything surrounding it and how hard Rick and Shawn worked in that match could not have gone better. It was a picture-perfect weekend for Ric Flair, perfect Hall of Fame, perfect retirement match, tons of emotion, and an absolutely beautiful send-off the next night on Monday Night Raw. And it was one of my favorite weekends in professional wrestling history, because myself and anybody else that admired Ric Flair, this was our chance to say goodbye to him. And it was a lovely ceremony and send-off. I couldn't have asked for anything more out of it. So I think deep down I'll always be a little bit disappointed that Ric Flair, I don't want to say ruined it, but yeah, he kind of did. I know he cares about what people think. I know he doesn't want to disappoint anybody. I do think he even called up Shawn Michaels and say, hey, I'm going to get back in the ring. And Shawn's like, hey, do what you got to do, man. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. But, Shawn went really out of his way to give Ric Flair a good match. Damn near broke some ribs, I think, during that moonsault into the table and some of the other things that he had to do to make a match with a 60-year-old good and memorable on a WrestleMania type of stage. So to me, if I was in Ric Flair's shoes, I don't think I could do that to Shawn Michaels. I don't think I could get back in the ring after everything that he gave to me and that nice send-off. But at the end of the day, you make your own decisions. Ric Flair had every right to do that. It's not like he was breaking any laws. He was well within his rights to go out there and wrestle another match if he wanted to. But looking back, now you wish he wouldn't have done it, because nothing he did in TNA was memorable whatsoever. Aside from probably being paid really well, which I'm sure he needed at the time. I think that was the only reason he really got back in the ring to begin with, is because he needed the money. So I know they paid him well, and that's good for him. But when I think about Ric Flair's final match, I don't want to think about that happening in TNA. I'd rather think about that happening in WWE. At the end of the day, I'm not going to hold that against Ric Flair. I absolutely love the guy. One of my favorite characters and careers in the history of professional wrestling. He's been through a lot. This is a guy on top of wrestling for 40 years that survived a plane crash. A plane crashed in the very city that I used to live in, Wilmington, North Carolina, back in the 70s, and the motherfucker not only survives, but goes on to wrestle for another 30 years. It's crazy. He's overcome a lot of adversity in his life, and he's had to suffer some tragedies as well. I think it's horrible what happened to his son Reed and the way he died. That has to be absolutely heartbreaking for a parent. So I feel for Rick in those instances, and all I want for Ric Flair is for him to live his final years as happy as possible. And I really hope that Ric Flair can finally settle down and go home and just kind of relax a little bit and enjoy watching his daughter kick ass on WWE. I think that can be great motivation for Ric Flair to kind of appreciate life a little bit more. I know he's got a podcast now, which is great. It's nice to see him doing other things. Everybody has a podcast now, it seems like, but if one guy deserves one, hell, Ric Flair sure does. Just when you think about the stories that he can tell alone of all his experiences in wrestling, I think would make for a great podcast. So I got to start checking out more of Flair's podcast and more of his guests, because I'm sure it's pretty good. But Rick had an amazing career, and he came damn close to making himself household name material. I mean, when you think about people who don't watch professional wrestling, they've all heard the name Hulk Hogan, they've all most likely heard the name Randy Savage, and they've all probably heard the name Ric Flair as well. His signature woo and the Nature Boy and all of that. Even people who don't watch wrestling probably have seen Ric Flair before a time or two. And that's a very short list. You know, the guys like Hogan, Savage, Andre the Giant, Ric Flair, The Rock in present day because of how successful he became in movies and Hollywood and all of that. There's only a few guys that casual fans or people who aren't fans of wrestling at all have heard of before. And Ric Flair, I think, made it to those heights. So congrats, Nate, on a hell of a career. We're not done seeing you yet. We still see you pop up on WWE TV every now and then. And let me just tell you, from one wrestling fan who's been watching for almost as long as you've been wrestling for, your daughter Charlotte, she's pretty damn good. Number 6, Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle makes this list, and he's pretty high up on my list because of my love for in-ring wrestling. And I have never been more impressed with anybody than I was with Kurt Angle when he first came in and debuted in the WWE, and how fucking good he turned out to be in such a short amount of time. I believe he translated an amateur career into a professional one better than anybody else in the history of the business ever has. He was performing at an amazing level with some top guys in a really short amount of time when WWE really didn't even have the developmental system like they do today. For him to come in and they put him on TV right away, and he started working with guys like Jericho and Benoit and having amazing matches and winning the European title and the Intercontinental title. And then within his first year, he's facing The Rock and winning the WWE title. Prior to that, he had main evented a couple of pay-per-views. Main evented SummerSlam 2000 with The Rock and Triple H. Had a big-time match against The Undertaker, I think, at Fully Loaded. Worked a three-way with Benoit and Jericho at WrestleMania. I mean, this guy accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, and he only got better. Year after year after year, Kurt Angle was easily having the best matches in the world with everything that he was doing in WWE, with his matches with Brock Lesnar and Shawn Michaels, Chris Benoit, The Rock, Triple H, Jericho, Edge, Rey Mysterio. Literally literally everybody he feuded with, pretty much, he had great matches with, and he was just so good. And his charisma factor, how great he was. He was so good when he first came in of being that kind of goofy, aw shucks type of guy that could be really comedic, and he had some hilarious interviews and promos and sketches backstage where he would just have us cracking up, but then he would get in the ring and he would deliver like a boss, like a fucking badass. He was a guy that you would be legitimately scared of, but his promos backstage with Edge and Christian and Mick Foley were the dumbest things you've ever seen. So I think he did a really good job of being able to play both characters really well. And then as his career progressed, he kind of got away from that goofy type of guy and became more serious. And then after he got his head shaved in that hair match, he really seemed like he started taking a more serious role and became Brock Lesnar level scary. I mean, this guy was somebody that was dangerous in the ring, could out-wrestle anyone, would make you submit by damn near breaking your foot off in the ankle lock, and he was winning matches and beating some top guys. I mean, that match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21 is one of my favorite WrestleMania matches ever, and it was fucking awesome, and he made the Heartbreak Kid tap. The guy that doesn't lay down for anybody tapped his balls off to the Olympic champion Kurt Angle. And that's another thing. He's an Olympic gold medal winner. And you believed it when you saw him work. He was a legitimate, credible athlete, which I always liked when they would put him on top, because I've said this a few times in this commentary and a lot throughout the years. People who aren't wrestling fans, a lot of people look down on professional wrestling. So Kurt is a guy that when he's in there and somebody who doesn't like watching wrestling is watching one of his matches, at least I can feel proud that this is a guy that is going to represent in-ring work well. And he's probably going to do some things that's going to impress the non-wrestling fan that's watching. So Kurt Angle, I thought, was extremely credible. He's a guy that could have easily been successful in any form of MMA had he decided to go that route. Plus, he was a great wrestler, and everybody he worked with in the WWE, he had unbelievable matches with. And then he left. He left in 2006 and went to TNA, and he's been there pretty much ever since, and racked up a pretty damn nice career in TNA as well. Some of his matches with AJ Styles and Samoa Joe are legendary in that promotion. So it's funny that I've got a guy on this list that hasn't been in the WWE in 12 years, but even at his age, even to this day, when Kurt Angle works an independent promotion or does something overseas or just wrestles somewhere else, he can still wrestle, and he's got, what is he, pushing 50 years old now? I'm sure we will see him back in the WWE one day. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2017 or if it's going to be held off maybe for next year in 2018 with a Hall of Fame induction, and the WWE is always looking for people to put on the cover of that video game every year, so maybe they'll hold him off for that. But you would think at some point Kurt Angle is going to have to come back into the WWE, hopefully, and have one more match and a Hall of Fame deal and a send-off and a DVD and the whole thing. Like I said in the intro, I'm not basing this list on championships or accomplishments or how much money they made or anything like that. I'm basing this list on how much they entertained me. And I never get tired of watching Kurt Angle wrestle. He has more great moments and more 5-star matches that I can even count. And whether he's a babyface, whether he's a heel, whether he's winning in triumphant fashion or losing to Eddie Guerrero or Brock Lesnar or something like that, he always looks like $1 million doing it. And the guy is a true pro. Much like some of my issues with Ric Flair, all I want for Kurt Angle and his future is for him to be happy. I think he is way too good of a wrestler to potentially ruin his career with personal problems or drug addiction, which he's openly had. He's had a lot of drug problems and things like that. So whatever Kurt Angle winds up doing with the rest of his life and career, I just hope that he's comfortable and he's happy and he's clean and he's got his shit together. I'm proud that professional wrestling was able to have somebody like Kurt Angle represent it, and he was one of the greatest champions we have ever had. Number 5, The Undertaker. Now, for all the reasons that Kurt Angle made the list at number 6, The Undertaker makes the list for completely opposite reasons. Although I think The Undertaker is very good in the ring and awesome, what makes this character so special to me is just what The Undertaker has meant, his legacy, the character itself, the entrance, the presentation of the whole thing. It's a legendary, mythic type figure and a true icon and a Mount Rushmore WWE guy and definitely statue worthy. That is for sure when The Undertaker finally does retire. This guy debuted in the WWE at Survivor Series 1990. That was 27 years ago. He had a few years in the business prior to that in Smoky Mountain and WCW and a few other places. The Undertaker, I have so many memories of him in the WWE, and when you think about how long his career has lasted, and much like Chris Jericho, he's been able to reinvent his character year after year, sometimes just tweaking a few things, and other times completely changing his personality. The Undertaker, I think, was one of the most legitimate, scary guys that WWE had, even back in the day. I loved watching his matches and feuds he would have with Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake Roberts and Yokozuna, and just how damn impressive the guy was for somebody as big as he was. And he instantly became a larger-than-life star in the WWE. We've all heard the story that he was initially brought in, I think, just to work a 6-month program with Hogan and get beaten and sent on his way. But the gimmick got over. It fit him so well. He was such a perfect example of how a character or a gimmick just fits that particular person, because that gimmick on somebody else, I could never imagine it working, especially to the degree that it wound up working to, and Undertaker to this day is still working WrestleMania matches. So it just went on the right individual. That gimmick was tailor-made for Mark Calloway. And I think when you look at his body of work, he is every bit as important to the WWE as a guy like Hulk Hogan is, or Randy Savage, or The Rock, or anybody like that. He has spanned all of these different decades. He's worked with everybody. I mean, Andre the Giant was still alive and making appearances in the WWE when The Undertaker made his debut. I mean, that's how far back his career goes. And Paul Bearer had that talk show, The Funeral Parlor, and he would come out of the caskets to attack baby faces and stuff. He was just a really creepy type of guy. And, you know, kids in general were scared of him. Hell, I was a teenager and I was scared shitless of the guy. I mean, his whole gimmick was to no-sell. I mean, he sold nothing. Guys would punch him, knock him down, pile drive him, whatever, and he would sit up every single time. That is not something that we really saw in wrestling. I mean, nobody no-sold to that degree. Not even Hogan. I mean, Hogan would hulk up and be impervious to pain for the finish of all of his matches, but Taker wouldn't sell shit no matter what kind of beating he took. He would always sit up and rise to his feet, and sometimes it was hard for people to even knock him off his feet. I actually really enjoyed his first babyface run. When he first turned babyface in 1992, I enjoyed that run a lot. And then he left when he lost the casket match to Yokozuna and returned and had the Undertaker versus Undertaker match. Definitely a blemish on the Undertaker's career, and that whole stupid storyline and fiasco was kind of dumb. But he kind of went into phase 2 of his babyface run when he won that match at SummerSlam and switched to the purple gloves and all of that, and was pretty much kept away from the WWE title and just put in feuds with giants. That's what the WWE would always do with this guy, because his character was so unstoppable that they couldn't really put him in a world title feud because nobody would believe that the champion could beat him. So they always kept the Undertaker busy with guys like Yokozuna or Kamala or Giant Gonzalez. And then in his second babyface run, he's working with Mabel and Kama and all these guys. They just didn't want to have him in any world title programs until around 1996 when he finally got a title shot and I think wrestled Bret Hart at the Royal Rumble. And it would be a whole entire year after that, 1997, where The Undertaker would finally win the WWE title again for the first time since beating Hogan for it 6 years prior. He would finally get that big moment at WrestleMania against Sid. But then after that, you think about how he changed up his look and his persona, and he switched back and forth to being a heel and a babyface sometimes. His brother Kane came in late 97, and then he would wind up even teaming up with Kane and turning heel in 1998, having world championship matches throughout all of this, and then he would even have a heel run as champion in 1999, and he got darker with his character back then. It was the Ministry, and he was trying to crucify and sacrifice people, and he tried to embalm Steve Austin. He started talking more. The first 7 years or so of The Undertaker's career, he didn't really say a whole lot. Now he started to cut longer promos, have a little bit more of a personality. He then got injured and came back as the biker, completely shedding the whole dead man gimmick, and he did that for a couple of years before returning at WrestleMania 20, which I thought was a perfect place to re-debut the dead man gimmick. And here we are coming up on WrestleMania 33 as of the upload of this commentary, and he is still wrestling. What I liked about The Undertaker is that he had a lot of memorable feuds and storylines and angles during each phase of his career. You know, some of his early feuds in the early 90s were great. His mid and late 90s run with Austin and Kane and all those guys was a lot of fun to watch. And then in the 2000s, he continues to win world titles, you know, feuding with guys like Batista and Edge and a lot of new generation guys. So, you know, when you look at The Undertaker's body of work of his career, it is easily one of my favorites of all time. And if I was to make a list of the top 10 greatest wrestlers of all time, not my top 10 favorite, but the top 10 greatest, I would have to put Undertaker probably in the top 3 due to the longevity of his run alone. When his days in the ring finally do come to an end, that is going to be one epic send-off. Can you imagine his Hall of Fame induction and his final match? We might even see it this year at WrestleMania. It's still yet to be determined, so who knows? I don't know if they will do his send-off together like they did with Ric Flair and do the Hall of Fame induction first and then have him have his last match and then do something on Raw the next night, or if they'll have him have his last match one year at WrestleMania and induct him into the Hall of Fame the following year at WrestleMania. Not sure how they're going to work all of that yet, but whatever they do, I would think that The Undertaker needs to have the greatest send-off in history, even better than Ric Flair. I hope the WWE goes all out for him. It'll be great closure for him and a capping off of an amazing career. It'll be closure for the fans. It'll give us all that opportunity to say goodbye to him and the awesome career that he's had, because a lot of you probably weren't even born when he started wrestling or when he debuted in the WWE. I mean, that was 27 years ago. So when you think about how long The Undertaker has been in wrestling, the average wrestling fan probably was not born when he debuted. So I've said it before, he's a statue guy. I think at Stamford there at the headquarters, along with Andre, along with the Warrior, you definitely have to have The Undertaker. I think Hulk Hogan deserves one as well whenever his controversy blows over. But when I think of my WWE Mount Rushmore, not necessarily professional wrestling, but my WWE Mount Rushmore, The Undertaker is guaranteed a spot on that mountain for sure. Number 4, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, arguably the greatest in-ring worker to ever step inside of a wrestling ring. The things Shawn was doing, not only early on in his career, but during his world title runs in the 90s in WWE, were amazing. He easily had the best matches in the world at that time, and that's why Shawn Michaels makes this list and why he's so high up on that list, because like I said, it's all about how these guys entertain me, and I loved watching Shawn Michaels work. I loved watching Shawn Michaels work maybe even more than I loved watching Kurt Angle work, because Shawn Michaels was so good and he was so flashy. And he was so ridiculously athletic, and he could sell, and he could tell a good story, and he just had amazing matches with so many guys. And his career was not perfect. I mean, Shawn Michaels had a lot of personal problems. You know, in the 90s there, he was quite the asshole. He had drug problems. He had clique problems. He had power issues. He had feuds with Bret Hart. He was a significant part of probably the most famous thing to ever happen in professional wrestling, and that is the screw job in 1997, which we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary of that. And his career was loaded with a lot of ups and downs, but the one thing that stayed constant is Shawn Michaels always had a great wrestling match. He could have a match with a couch, and you could still probably put it on the ballot for match of the year. Started out with Marty Jannetty, formed the Rockers. They were big in the AWA, tag team champions in the AWA, came into WWE a couple of times. The first time they infamously got fired on their first road trip for getting a little rowdy in a bar, and Vince let them go. And they were able to come back in about a year later, and the Rockers were a great team. I mean, WWE tag team wrestling in the late 80s and 90s, I thought was great, especially in the late 80s. And the Rockers came in there, I think, around 88, 89-ish. And they were doing some things that at that time we had not seen. We had not seen a lot of that synchronized double team type of moves and all the stuff that the Rockers would do. They were even calling themselves tag team specialists. And they were such a fun team to watch, a memorable team. A lot of people remember the Rockers. A lot of people who don't even really watch wrestling, they remember the Rockers, or remember seeing them on TV or something like that. It's a shame that they never got to be WWE tag team champions. I mean, they sort of did. Talk about controversial moments with Bret Hart. Shawn's been in a couple of those moments with him. And the Rockers beat the Hart Foundation for the titles on a Saturday night's main event TV taping, but of course the middle rope or the top rope broke, something like that, and they still went through with the match, but they decided not to air it and basically just took the titles away from the Rockers and did not recognize the title change, and they never held those belts. So as good as the Rockers were, looking back, I definitely think they should have been tag team champions. But Shawn, he had one of the most infamous splits and infamous tag team breakups of all time. He took Marty Jannetty's stupid face and threw it right through the barbershop window with what was essentially the birth of one of the greatest wrestling careers that we've ever seen. Shawn Michaels went on to be a star in the Intercontinental title division, having so many great matches with Bret Hart, with Razor Ramon. I mean, Shawn and Scott Hall changed the wrestling business with that ladder match at WrestleMania 10 that night. I think it was after that they realized that Shawn could be a main event player. He would get a title shot the next year against Diesel at WrestleMania 11. He would come up short, but at WrestleMania 12, he had the infamous Iron Man match, 60 minutes with Bret Hart, and wound up winning the WWE title in the main event in grand fashion. And that's unfortunately when his personal problems started kicking in, But despite all those personal problems and the fact that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had left for WCW, he was still going out there and having great matches in every single pay-per-view. His matches with the British Bulldog, his matches with Vader, his matches with Mankind, all of those were great. He even dropped the title in an extremely memorable way to Sid at Madison Square Garden at Survivor Series, and then came back to win it from him at the Royal Rumble in the Alamo Dome. The Royal Rumble is going to be there in just a couple of weeks in that very same building. And then after that is when things got weird. Shawn Michaels lost his smile. Some people think he didn't want to drop the title to Bret Hart or whatever they had planned for him, so he decided to cough the belt up and surrender it and take some time off. And upon his return, him and Bret Hart had their issues. They got into a backstage altercation, and Shawn Michaels was almost out the door and almost headed to WCW. And then when Vince McMahon decided to let Bret Hart out of his contract, that brought Shawn Michaels back into the fold, and he conspired to screw over Bret Hart and help Vince McMahon take the WWE title off of him, and Vince was going to go with Shawn. And then just a couple of months after that, he's dropping the belt to Steve Austin at WrestleMania with Mike Tyson, another extremely famous WrestleMania main event, and he was out the door and gone from professional wrestling for 4 years until he returned in 2002. And it's what Shawn Michaels did from 2002 until his retirement that allows him to be on my favorite wrestlers ever list, because he still continued to entertain me for another 8 years. He was already a Hall of Famer prior to him coming back, but when he was able to come back and give back so much to that degree, I mean, he was involved in a lot of main event matches and a lot of main event storylines, but he was never the guy that he was in the 90s, refusing to lay down for anybody, always wanting the title. As a matter of fact, he was losing, it seemed like, more often than he was winning. He lost some great matches to guys like Kurt Angle and John Cena and Chris Benoit and a few others, but was still able to wrestle at an extremely high level. He came back like he never missed a beat, as if he had never taken one single day off. And he came back in that return match with Triple H at SummerSlam and showed that anybody who thought he was the greatest in-ring worker in the 90s, he showed everybody that he still was. And it was just a really impressive run, and I was happy for Shawn. I mean, I'm not a religious person at all, but I'm really glad that Shawn Michaels found that in his life. I mean, if that's what it takes, you know, whatever it takes, fucking do it to clean yourself up. I mean, Shawn was headed down a really dark and ugly road, and for him to get married and have a kid and kind of get his priorities straight, and then he was able to find religion, and it somehow straightened him out. Religion or a church is not where I would turn to straighten myself out, but I'm not Shawn, and it worked for Shawn, and I could not be happier for him. I mean, he was such a raging dickhead. And he could still be that way from time to time. Shawn Michaels is not perfect. Even in his newfound Christian ways, there's still plenty of stories of him being a prick backstage or yelling or cursing or screaming at somebody or whatever. But I still don't think it was to the level that it was in the 90s, where Shawn Michaels was basically unbearable to even be around. He came back. He wasn't afraid to do a job. He worked with a lot of younger talent, helped put over John Cena and other guys, and really gave back. And I've always said that I look back on Shawn Michaels' second run in the company from 2002 to 2010 as his apology. It's almost as if he was saying, you know what, I'm sorry for making the mistakes that I made and stepping on some throats and being the jerk-off that I was, so I want to come back and give back. I just want to have great matches. I don't want to hold any belts. All I want to do is entertain people. And he did. It's not like Shawn Michaels couldn't do it in the ring. Oh, he's getting main event matches at WrestleMania and he gets big paydays and he has big pay-per-view spots. That's because he deserves it. I want to see Shawn Michaels wrestle in those matches. It's not like he's been given these opportunities for no reason. Shawn was good at what he did, and he deserved any main event spot on a pay-per-view that he got. I would much rather see Shawn in a main event than a lot of the other guys in the WWE at that time. So I personally never got pissy about Shawn Michaels' status in the company or his place or how much he was getting paid or how many pay-per-views he was main eventing or working on. I did not care. As long as I was seeing Shawn in the ring, I was happy. I mean, here's a guy that retired in 1998 and then 11 years later in 2009 has what I consider to be the greatest professional wrestling match that has ever happened between him and The Undertaker at WrestleMania 25. I still look back at that match in complete awe of what a great roller coaster ride it was. Physically, yes, there's plenty of other guys out there that can impress us on more of a physical level, I'm sure, athletically speaking and things like that. But as far as the stage, the story, the roller coaster of ups and downs and near falls and the fans hanging on every move and on the edge of their seat and the whole overall aura of it, it made the entire package what I consider to be the greatest professional wrestling match that has ever took place. And Shawn Michaels was a part of that 1 year before he decided to hang up his boots. So this is a guy, even at his age, physically, I think think he could still come out of retirement and get in the ring and perform at a high level. I hope that he does not, but I still think Shawn Michaels is capable of doing that. The guy was a magnificent athlete, and he could do some pretty amazing things in that ring. So I love going back and watching old Shawn Michaels matches. You can take any one of his matches from any time periods that he was wrestling, whether he was a rookie or whether he was a year away from being retired, and I promise you, you will be entertained by that match. And there's not a whole lot of guys that you can say that about. Shawn also has a high position on this list because of my personal memories of him. I mean, he was at his peak in a lot of different times in my life. When he first came in the Rockers, I was just a young kid. I was in college and living on my own in the 90s when he was kicking ass with DX, and then I was a grown-up adult when he came back for his return in 2002 through 2010, and I was entertained in all different phases of my life, just like he had many phases of his career. So, I was just around and alive to see a lot of Shawn Michaels' great moments, and it's all about my personal memories, and that's why he's up there. Don't get me wrong, if I made a top 10 nicest guys in the business list, Shawn wouldn't even make the list. But as far as my favorite wrestlers, man, any Shawn Michaels match that I watch, no matter who he's facing, I'm entertained by it. Number 3, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin is on this list for a number of reasons. A lot of obvious ones. I mean, he was a very, very huge star, probably the biggest star of the Attitude Era, and can be credited a lot with helping WWE turn the tables on WCW. Had it not been for that Stone Cold character, I don't know if, number one, WWE would have won the war with WCW, or if it would have taken longer to happen. I don't know. All I know is things would not have been the same. To lose Diesel and Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart all within a span of about a year and a half, they had a lot riding on the success of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and man, was that guy over during the Attitude Era. I remember when he was in WCW and US champion, I remember all the way back then thinking that I would love for him to go to the WWE. I thought he would be perfect in WWE. To me, he was appealing. He was a great talker. He was good in the ring. I loved everything he did with Brian Pillman and the Hollywood Blondes. I loved his run with some various singles belts that he had. And unfortunately, he was just one of those lost in the shuffle guys once Hogan and Savage came over there. And then he went over to ECW and started really kind of developing that Stone Cold character. I remember in my tape trading days getting a whole tape full of all of Austin's uncut promos from ECW. All that stuff they did in Paul Heyman's basement and him dressed up like Hulk Hogan. I think he impersonated Eric Bischoff on Monday Night Quill and all that stuff. All of those promos that he was doing, you could tell that he was pissed off by the way he was let go, by the way he was treated. And I think it was a lot of those real life situations that gave him that chip on his shoulder and helped develop what Stone Cold Steve Austin would become. I mean, he said it a million times that the Stone Cold Steve Austin character is who he really is with the volume turned way up. And without those experiences in WCW, he might not have been as full of piss and vinegar as he was when he got into the WWE and came in as the ringmaster and spoke up. You got to give him credit for speaking up and say, hey, this gimmick sucks. You got to give me something better than that. They went back to calling him by his ring name, and he came up with a Stone Cold part. And the rest, he handled on his own, on the microphone. And his wrestling style, how it kind of changed, especially after the pile driver from Owen Hart. He became this badass ass-kicker, ground-based brawler, and he backed it up with some amazing promos and mic skills, some of the best that we've ever seen. I loved his interviews. I would love when he would get in an opponent's face. I loved that he didn't back down from anybody, no matter how big or bad they were. And he sure as hell didn't put up with any of Shawn Michaels' click bullshit either. He was a really no-nonsense type of guy inside and out of the ring. He's another guy that has a case to be on the Mount Rushmore mountain or have a statue at headquarters or something like that. I mean, he was extremely significant to WWE. His career was cut a little bit short. It's a shame with all the neck injuries that was really started by Owen Hart and SummerSlam 1997. He had to retire a little bit early. In 2003 was his last match, so his run on top really wasn't that long. But as far as how much I enjoyed him, man, there's hardly anything that Austin ever did that I considered boring. I loved all of his feuds. He made everything feel real and important and serious. And I think he really got on the map during his feud with Bret Hart. That match at WrestleMania 13 was one of the best things I've ever seen. Austin cut a promo, I think the week after, or maybe 2 weeks after, on Monday Night Raw, talking to Bret Hart and said, even though you beat me to a bloody pulp, you'll have to kill me to be finished with me, and vowed to come after him. And I just remember seeing the intensity in his eyes, and I'm like, wow, this guy's going to be something. He's entertaining. Even after that promo, Vince McMahon was kind of staring him up and down, like, holy shit, what the hell do I have on my hands here? Austin was doing things on the microphone that we had really not seen up until that point. The middle fingers, the swearing, the beer drinking was so perfect for that time because society in general seemed to have an attitude during that time. So everything that Stone Cold Steve Austin was doing was perfect for the demographic they were chasing and perfect for the time period that it was back in 1998 and 1999. And just, the overall attitude in society in general was perfect for Stone Cold Steve Austin. And man, I just remember laughing at some of his promos and feeling scared during some of his promos. He could really take it to a lot of different levels. His feud with Vince McMahon was one of the greatest in wrestling history because so many people could live vicariously through that, of kind of a no-nonsense guy having a feud with his boss and being able to curse at him and give him the finger and kick his ass and all that stuff. Everybody would love to do that to their boss. So not only did Steve Austin's character relate to a lot of people, but his feuds related to a lot of people as well. And he had some great WrestleMania moments. He won the WWE title in 3 consecutive WrestleManias that he competed in, won it in 14, won it in 15, sat out 16 with an injury, and came back at WrestleMania 17 and beat The Rock for the title and turned heel. Now, his heel run was not nearly as successful as his babyface run, and in general is looked back on as a failure, but he still had his moments as a heel. There are a few things that he did really well. I loved his heel feud with Kurt Angle when Kurt Angle was a babyface. I loved some of the comedy skits they did backstage with Vince McMahon and playing the guitar and when Austin would start to sing. Austin really worked hard to get some heat on himself because he thought it was going to be hard for fans to cheer him, and he was right. It was difficult at first, and you got to credit Austin for being able to come up with ideas to get the fans to hate him or to boo him. And a lot of what he did with his personality change actually made that happen. Austin, he made the heel run work, even though it wasn't one of the most successful things he's ever done. It was still pretty damn memorable. I hate the fact that he had to retire in 2003, but I also like the fact that he's not one of these guys that hung around too long. The decision was made for him. The injury to his neck and everything had taken its toll over the years, and he was getting to the point where he was risking his life every time he got in the ring, so he had no choice but to retire. There are rumors every single year, especially around WrestleMania time, that Austin might come back and have one more match. I do believe that he's physically capable of having one more match, but at this point, he's now in his 50s. Who would he even work with? They passed up opportunities for him to work with CM Punk and Brock Lesnar in the past, so at this point, I'm perfectly fine remembering Stone Cold for the ass kicker that he was. It would have been nice if he was able to come back a couple years after he retired, 2005, 2006, possibly have that match with Hulk Hogan that they teased about 10 years ago. But since none of that ever happened, I'm perfectly fine remembering Stone Cold for who he was, and I know he keeps busy in his personal life with his TV shows and his podcast and his beer drinking and all of that, so I have a lot to remember Stone Cold Steve Austin by, and I loved his career. I did review his DVD. I think him and Jericho are the only two guys on this list whose DVD I did a review of, so I'll put a link there on the screen for you if you want to go back and listen to me talk about his entire career. With the heights that The Rock has made it to in Hollywood and what a big draw somebody like Brock Lesnar is, I don't know if I still consider Austin to be the second most successful wrestler of all time behind Hulk Hogan. I used to think it was Hogan then Austin. But now with all the money that The Rock has made and Brock has made with his contracts, I don't know if Austin still holds that accolade or not, but he was definitely the first guy to challenge Hulk Hogan in drawing power and name recognition and merchandise sales. If anything, Austin beat Hogan in merchandise sales. Granted, they had a lot more items in the Attitude Era. If you remember, back in the Attitude Era when Austin started getting hot, they started coming out with every single possible toy or collectible that you could even imagine, from hats to t-shirts to keychains to wallets to luggage. You name it, they had it. Anything with Stone Cold Steve Austin's face or likeness on it, fans were going to buy it. And he made himself and the WWE a ton of money. And had it not been for Stone Cold, WCW Nitro might be on the air to this very day. Number 2, Macho Man Randy Savage. Randy Savage holds such a special place in my heart. I have so many fond memories of watching him growing up. I've talked a lot in this commentary about how much I like the better in-ring workers, the more athletic guys, and nobody represented that better than Macho Man Randy Savage. And he was a guy on top. I mentioned that I loved watching tag team wrestling in the 80s because of how athletic and good and fast and quick everybody was. Here's a guy, Macho Man Randy Savage, that allowed me to enjoy that on a main event level. He was a world title guy that had that type of agility and quickness, and he started out in the Intercontinental title ranks and had some amazing matches throughout his career in the WWE. And when I look back at this list, he's very similar to Shawn and Angle in the sense that I never got bored with one of their matches. No matter what they're doing in the ring, it's pretty damn entertaining because they all give it 150% every time they're out there. Savage was incredibly intense, and he took his matches very seriously, no matter how small or big they were. I remember when he came into the WWE, because I had already known who he was from Memphis. And when he showed up in the WWE, I'm like, oh, this is great. I've always been a fan of his. Everything that I've seen of him in the magazines and the few clips of footage that I was lucky enough to see, I was a fan of Savage. So when he showed up in WWE, I thought that was great. And then he won the Intercontinental title, beating Tito Santana, and had a long run with the belt. And of course, one of the greatest wrestling matches that have ever taken place. I was there live to see it, WrestleMania 3, Savage versus Steamboat, 90,000 people. Steamboat beats Savage for the Intercontinental title, and it was a fucking masterpiece. Randy Savage, much like a lot of other guys on this list, is one of those wrestlers that entertain me equally, regardless of whether or not they were on the mic or whether or not they were in the ring. They were equally good at both, and Savage was so intense, and he was so crazy, and his promos, sometimes they didn't even make sense, but they kind of did. He looked like the veins were going to pop out of his neck. When he was mad at you, you better be scared shitless. Bobby the Brain Heenan used to always put over how crazy Savage was, and if you piss Savage off, and he's out for blood and he's out for revenge, you better get the hell out of Dodge because you are fucked. Miss Elizabeth worked so well by his side, not only as a heel. Valets and females always work better with heels, but it worked equally as well as a babyface. Miss Elizabeth was so beloved. Everybody loved her. She was so sweet. I cannot believe that she was married to a complete nutcase like Savage. And we've all heard some crazy stories about those two over the years as well. Savage was a guy that no matter who he worked with, it felt real. That feud he had with Hulk Hogan, that year-long build that he had with the Mega Powers, with him winning the title in the tournament at WrestleMania 4, and then defending the belt for a solid year, only to drop it to Hulk Hogan a year later. They took a whole year to kind of build the relationship between Randy and Hulk, only to have them break up in the end, and they had subtle hints to that, dating all the way back to the previous summer at SummerSlam when Savage was kind of looking at Hogan funny. I mean, they planted the seeds for this way in advance, and it finally came to a head, and they main evented a WrestleMania together. And even though Savage dropped the belt to Hulk, it still holds up as one of Hulk Hogan's better matches and a very entertaining WrestleMania main event. But that whole year-long build between those two and everything going on just holds a very special place in my memory and my heart, because I was just a kid watching that, or an early teenager or a preteen, or however the hell old I was when all that stuff was going on. I remember it fondly. It's a big part of my childhood, and I'm very nostalgic for stuff like that, which is why Randy Savage probably makes this countdown. Not only did I think he was a fantastic wrestler, but I just have so many personal memories of him. I was so heartbroken in 1994. Normally, I would roll with the punches with wrestling. If something would happen, or somebody would jump ship, or there was some sort of controversy, I could usually take it just fine. But for some reason, I was really devastated when Randy Savage left the WWE in 1994. In my eyes, he was all they had left. I was already nervous because WCW had taken Hogan and taken all of these other 80s stars. Randy Savage was that only guy left in the WWE that had any sort of long legacy in the company. I mean, he was a two-time WWE champion. Once Savage left, they barely had any former champions left in the WWE. They had Brett and they had Taker, who had only had a cup of coffee with it in 1991. Other than that, they didn't really have anybody else that had held the belt before. So to me, it felt like their history was leaving them and going over to WCW, and I hated it. And the last thing in the world I wanted to see is Randy Savage, one very recognizable household name that the WWE still has. He wound up leaving and going to WCW, and it broke my fucking heart. And I would get even more sad when he first got there, because the very first thing that he did is start interacting with Hulk Hogan. WCW tries to recreate everything that happened in the WWE, and it wasn't as good, and I felt like it was a waste. I'm like, I don't want to see Savage and Hogan back together. I thought they hated each other. Savage would openly insult and shoot on Hulk Hogan on commentary sometimes in 1994 after Hulk Hogan had left the company. I remember in Savage's feud with Crush, he made some crack on commentary, like, I gotta have this confrontation with Crush, and if Hulk Hogan wants to have a confrontation with me too, he's welcome to show up and I'll slap his face or whatever. So, I thought Savage really disliked Hogan, and then he jumped over to WCW, patched things up with Hogan. Hogan helped get him in, and his beginning run there was really disappointing. I kind of tuned in, and I would just throw up at the sight of seeing Savage under a WCW umbrella. It just did not look right to see him there. I was really uncomfortable with it, and it really had an effect on me as a wrestling fan. I was just not happy. Now, as things would progress and Savage's career would continue on in WCW and WWE would start gaining some ground in the Attitude Era. Then I started liking Savage again. Savage went back to being a heel. He had some great matches with DDP and a few other guys in WCW. He was back to cutting his awesome promos, and I kind of liked him as that darker, heelish NWO type character. It was much more entertaining than him being just the same old macho man like he was trying to be in the WWE in WCW. It wasn't translating that well. So Savage kind of reinvented himself, got real big again. He always had involvement with steroids, I do know that, but he got really big and bulky there in the late 90s. Where in the early 90s, his physique started to diminish and he was even wrestling with the shirt on for a lot of years. So there were some aspects of Savage's career in WCW that I did enjoy, but the very act of him going over there and jumping ship and leaving the WWE was something that scarred me for many years. I was devastated when he died in 2011, because now it's like we can't even see Randy Savage go back to the WWE. He had done the video game commercial or the action figure commercial or something about a year before he died. And I was thinking to myself, you know what, maybe he can finally come back in and get a send-off and be put in the Hall of Fame like he deserves. It'd be so great to see him. It would be closure for me, for sure. I was really hoping we would see it. Of course, there's the rumors of why everybody came back to the WWE other than Savage. He never made it back in, despite Vince patching up issues and bad feelings with a lot of guys like Warrior and Bruno Sammartino and countless others. Why Randy Savage was not able to come back is a big topic for debate. There's Stephanie McMahon rumors and things like that. So it's sad that we'll probably never know. We will never solve this mystery ever because Savage is dead. And I just wish he was able to come back to the WWE while he was still alive, be inducted in the Hall of Fame, shake hands with Vince McMahon. You know, for a fan like me, that's all I wanted to see. And I would have felt like my wrestling life was complete if I saw that happen, and we never did. And of course, Savage is in the Hall of Fame now, which is wonderful, but it came so late. What the hell took so long? Why didn't you guys have a conversation? Why couldn't Savage come into the WWE or come back to the WWE all the way back in 2004 or 5 or 6 or 7 or any other year that they had the opportunity to patch things up, give him a call, put him in the Hall of Fame? He's one of the most famous wrestlers in WWE history. How can you not have him in there? And for a while, without Bruno and without Savage, I was saying, you know, this Hall of Fame is a crock of shit. In my mind, I like to sit back and imagine Randy Savage sitting at a bar stool with Elizabeth on one side and Sherry Martel on the other side, and the three of them just getting wasted together. Well, maybe Savage and Sherry get wasted together and they get nuts. Liz is probably the DD. But when you think of those three personalities and how many other great legends that we've seen that have passed away, it's so sad how many people we lost, and Savage was one of my absolute favorites. Had it not been for a Canadian-born, pink tight-wearing wrestler that touched my heart in a completely different way, Randy Savage very well could have been number one on my list. All right, and finally, before we get to the very obvious number one wrestler on this list, why don't I go through a few of my honorable mentions? This was a really tough list for me to make. There was a lot of people that I wanted to put on my top 10, but there's just not enough slots available. So some of the other names I jotted down that were in contention here, and a couple of these guys were actually on the list and I took off. But one of the first guys is Hulk Hogan. Yeah, Hulk Hogan. I mean, he never was really my favorite, but that does not mean that I didn't like him. And I still had a lot of great memories of Hulk. I was there in person to watch him body slam Andre the Giant. I watched his run on top of the WWE for well over 10 years there from the 80s to the early 90s. And that was a big important part of my young life as well. So I have to at least consider Hogan to be on my top 10 list. But still, at the end of the day, he was never my favorite. And I'd probably definitely put him in top 20, top 25, though, something like that. Another guy is Sting, another really large figure in wrestling, made his name primarily all in WCW and TNA and some other places in the world. His run in WCW, I always liked. I was always a Sting fan. When I look at Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, two former tag team partners, Sting was 100 times better worker than the Ultimate Warrior was. And I always thought WCW had the better guy. And I think Sting could have made it to huge heights with Vince McMahon, but he still made it to some pretty damn impressive heights on his own in NWA and WCW. That Sting character and his look and his charisma, and again, much like Jericho, much like Undertaker, his ability to reinvent himself and change with the times type of thing and change his persona up to keep himself fresh, he was a master at that. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. When you think about guys on my top 10 that made the list primarily for their in-ring ability, Ricky Steamboat would be one of those guys. He was so smooth, so fun to watch. Champions in all different territories. Worked a lot in NWA, worked a lot in WWE. One of the nicest and most respected guys guys in the business. Nobody ever said a bad word about Ricky Steamboat. A great career, a lifelong babyface. A lot of things that he did was very rare and innovative for the time as well. And he had some amazing feuds with Ric Flair and Randy Savage and a lot of other guys. He was just an amazing performer. Even when he came back in 2009, remember, and he worked with Jericho? He was like 60 years old and still agile as hell for his age. He was just a phenomenal athlete. Speaking of phenomenal athletes, arguably the best athlete in the Hart family, and that was Owen. I gotta put Eddie Guerrero on this list too. He was one of my favorite guys of the modern era, and Eddie was awesome. I mean, the things he could do in the ring, and he was so fast and so quick, brought up in a great wrestling family, and was a big star in Mexico and everywhere else before he even came to WCW or WWE. And it was nice to see him get a world title run too. You know, he didn't really have that successful of a run in WCW. Some awesome matches there. Cruiserweight title, I think even US title at one time he held, but he didn't really achieve any great heights until he got to the WWE. Was able to develop a personality in the whole Latino heat and was involved in some storylines, some shit that WCW never did with him. And eventually found his way into the main event of a pay-per-view against Brock Lesnar for the title and wound up winning it. That moment of WrestleMania 20 with him and Chris Benoit embracing and hugging was one of the most touching moments we've ever seen in wrestling. It was great. I loved Eddie Guerrero. And speaking of Chris Benoit, I will be perfectly honest here. Chris Benoit was on my list. Chris Benoit was number 2. That's how much I admired Chris Benoit's in-ring work. But I decided, out of respect for Nancy and Daniel and everything that happened, I'm just going to leave him off the list. No need to stir up any controversy or anything like that. We all know the circumstances surrounding Chris Benoit's death and everything that happened, and it's the biggest tragedy that wrestling's ever suffered, and it sucks, and it still haunts me to this day. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that. One of my favorite wrestlers in the 80s was the Dynamite Kid. I've talked a lot about tag team wrestling in the WWE in the 80s, and I love the Dynamite Kid. I thought his work was great. And then later on in life, when I became a tape trader and I was able to see where he came from and all of his matches in Stampede Wrestling and all of that, I just instantly fell in love with him. And here Chris Benoit is, who loved the guy probably better than anyone and tried to emulate him in every way possible, and he succeeded. He was literally a physical carbon copy of the Dynamite Kid. Same height, same build, same mannerisms, same wrestling style, same everything. And I loved Benoit and Dynamite's intensity, their punches, their kicks, the way they would sell, their physique. They looked like really rough, tough individuals, you know, and Benoit had the tooth missing. And he was a guy that you would never see walk through a match. You guys know what I'm talking about. Everybody, I'm sure, has attended house shows or something like that. You know when wrestlers are walking through a match. Benoit never did that. He seemed like he was just full blast 100% of the time. And his wrestling style was so good and so crisp, and he was so technically sound. And his matches that he had throughout his career with Kurt Angle and Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Triple H, Eddie Guerrero. I mean, Benoit had some amazing matches with a lot of guys, and I really wanted to put Benoit on this list. But unfortunately, he doesn't make the cut because of all the crazy shit that happened in his life. But as far as being an in-ring worker, whenever I can put all of that stuff that happened in his personal life out of my head and just sit down and watch one of his wrestling matches, I'm still entertained by it to this day. He was one of the best that this business has ever seen. It's a true tragedy. And also, for shits and gigs, I'm going to throw out Rob Van Dam. He's another guy that I just loved watching his matches, and he was doing some very innovative things, and he was incredibly agile and flexible and athletic, and he could do so many things so well. And his time in ECW and that match and a series of matches that he had with Jerry Lynn would definitely, no joke, be on my top 10 favorite wrestling matches of all time. If I wind up doing one of those videos, expect Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn to be one of those numbers. I loved his run in WWE, held a lot of titles there, a lot of great matches for the Intercontinental title, a lot of great feuds with Jeff Hardy and Eddie Guerrero. He worked with Kurt Angle. He worked with everybody. And even had that big match against John Cena at ECW One Night Stand where he won the WWE title and the ECW title and almost merged them together. And had it not been for him and Sabu getting pulled over, he probably would have had a nice healthy run with that title. That was a big night in the business, one of the most memorable of all time. When John Cena came into that show, just being crucified by the audience. They were so pro Rob Van Dam and so anti-John Cena. It's one of the most hostile environments any wrestler has ever competed in, ever. And so for Rob Van Dam to beat John Cena in front of that crowd in that building on that night was one of my favorite moments in wrestling. But all in all, Rob Van Dam was just a very pleasant guy to watch work. I've got about 20 other guys that I could throw on my honorable mentions list, but I've been talking for a while now, and we should wrap this thing up and move on to the king of the ring, so to speak. Number 1, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, not only in his own mind, but in my mind as well. No big shocker here. My favorite wrestler of all time easily was Bret the Hitman Hart. Even at a younger age, I tried to be impartial and I tried not to have too many favorites and try to root for guys too hard or idolize people or anything like that. I really enjoyed watching wrestling as a whole and not just for one singular guy. But Bret Hart is a guy that I just felt like I had a connection with. I discovered him in the mid-'80s when he came into the WWE. I already knew of the Hart family, but much like I talked about with Dynamite Kid, when I got into tape trading, I was able to see a lot more of Bret and a lot more of Bret and Dynamite together working matches in Stampede and seeing their origins and where they came from, and it made me like those guys even that much more. And I remember being drawn to Bret back in his tag team days as a heel with Jim Neidhart, going that far back. That's when I just started watching some of their matches and I was like, I like this Bret Hart guy. And if me and my friends ever had pretend matches in the backyard and we wanted to do tag team matches, I always had to be Bret Hart. If somebody else tried to be Bret Hart instead of me, I would literally straight up go home, quit, take my ball, and walk right the fuck out of there. Nobody was Bret Hart other than me. It's a rule. So when he broke away and finally went singles permanently, I couldn't have been happier. And I talked about it earlier on in this countdown when I was talking about Hennig, but that match with Kurt Hennig at SummerSlam 91 might be my favorite professional wrestling match ever. It's at least up there. It meant the world to me. I remember watching that on pay-per-view that night and being so thrilled that Bret Hart won a singles belt, and I was still thinking that he wasn't going to do it because Bret had already worked with Kurt Hennig prior, the first time they split up the Hart Foundation, and Bret would job to him every night. So back then there was no dirt sheets. I didn't know Kurt Hennig was hurt. But then I see Bret Hart's parents in the crowd, and I start paying more attention to the commentary. Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon and Roddy Piper were entertaining as hell during this match. And just the overall feel of it, I started thinking that, man, maybe Bret Hart could win. And when he turned over perfect and locked in that sharpshooter and Earl almost instantaneously rang the bell, I was like, holy shit, Bret's a champion. He went up into the crowd and hugged his parents, and it was an awesome moment. And that really kick-started his singles run. And I was just really attracted to Bret Hart's look. I thought he looked great with a belt. I loved the leather jacket and the pink and the hair and the sunglasses. It was just a very cool looking character to me at the time. And on top of that, he was so good in the ring. I mean, he was so smooth and so believable, and that's what I was drawn to. I like a guy that when he punches you, it looks like he's actually punching you. Bret Hart was taught right. I mean, his father is Stu Hart. He grew up in that amazing wrestling family. I've been obsessed with the Harts for years. I just love hearing stories of Stu and how he made it in the wrestling business and how all those kids grew up together in that big mansion and the ups and downs, and sometimes they'd be rich and sometimes they'd have no money at all. And what a weird thing, or what a kind of a strange life it would have been, or it must have been, to be a Hart kid. I couldn't even imagine living in that environment. So I was always very interested in the Hart family legacy and Bret Hart and everything. It's just, he's just a guy that I've always been drawn to. He's given me countless memories. He's one of the only guys I really mark out for, and I watched him win all 5 of his WWE titles, and I was happy every time. The only one I didn't get to see happen live was the first one, when I turned on WWE TV one day. I think it was the Superstars or Wrestling Challenge episode on the weekend, and me and Gene sitting there doing an interview with world champion Bret Hart. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? I had no idea he had even won the belt. And then come to find out, he defeated Ric Flair at a house show in Saskatoon, which did get recorded and put on a WWE VHS tape a couple of years later, a few months later. But it was a match that really nobody ever got a chance to see. But it was still a really good match, and I couldn't believe that in 1992 they put the belt on Bret Hart, and I was instantly even that much more of a fan of Bret's than I was before. Now he's world champion. Now things have really changed. This is a guy that I grew up admiring that never in my wildest dreams when he was wrestling in the Hart Foundation could I ever envision him as world champion. That seemed like something that was completely out of reach for Bret Hart. I mean, it was all about Hogan and Warrior, and Bret Hart is never somebody that I even really rooted for to be a world champion. I never sat there and said, oh, I hope they give Bret Hart the opportunity to be a world champion one day. Now that's all the fans say about anything. Once somebody starts getting hot, no, he should be world champion. We didn't think like that back in the day. Fans weren't freaking out and screaming like they are now for Cesaro and other guys to get opportunities. To me, it never even seemed possible that Bret Hart would get that opportunity. So when he did, it almost validated what I had loved about him all my life. I'm like, I told you motherfuckers that this guy was good. All my friends wondered what my obsession with him was, and I just enjoyed what he did. I liked his character. I loved his in-ring work. He was so awesome to watch, and I was telling everybody. I felt like Bobby the Brain Heenan when he talked shit about Hulk Hogan all those years, and then he got validated when Hulk Hogan turned heel. He's like, see, I told you so. I was the one saying Bret Hart was awesome in 1985. And here he is years later, he's WWE champion. And I felt good because I was like, wow, even at a young age, even being a teenager, I felt like I had an eye for talent. And it felt good to watch Bret Hart become a world champion because I was a fan of his right from the start. So obviously that made the connection even that much stronger, and I hated it when he dropped the belt to Yokozuna. One of the darkest days for me as a wrestling fan is when Hulk Hogan came back to the WWE and won the title at WrestleMania 9 right after Bret had carried it for a few months and did a great job with it and had to drop it to Yoko only for Hogan to get it back and not defend it at all. Dropped it to Yoko on his way out the door and left. He should have stayed there. He should have worked with Bret Hart. He should have put him over at SummerSlam 1993. It would have been good for Bret, and I still resent Hulk Hogan for the way that whole thing went down. It sucked. It was bullshit. But it didn't matter. The WWE fans were on the Bret Hart bandwagon. And I remember it vividly in 1993 when Vince is trying to push Lex Luger after Hogan left and it not working out and the fans basically demanding. They basically did a lot what the fans did in 2014 with Daniel Bryan. And that is that they were rejecting Lex Luger and they were screaming for Bret Hart, to where WWE changed their plans. Lex Luger was supposed to win the title at WrestleMania 10, but Bret Hart did instead because that's who the fans wanted. And I loved his WWE title run in 1994 too. Even though 1994 was a down year in WWE and wrestling in general, I was still very much into the Bret Hart title run, and I wasn't happy to see him drop it to Bob Backlund. And much like the Hogan debacle at WrestleMania 9, then they have Diesel turn around and win the belt just a couple of days after that, and I'm like, fuck, well, I guess that means Bret Hart's out of the world title picture. Here I thought he might have a rematch with Backlund, he might win the belt back, but instead they gave the belt to Diesel and let him run with it for nearly a year until that really didn't work out and they went back to Bret again. And one of my favorite Bret Hart matches of all time was Survivor Series 1995, a very underrated title match with Diesel. I think it was a no disqualification match and they got really physical. Bret even went through a table, which is something that you did not see in 1995. Bret had some awesome matches that year. Even the next month, the In Your House, where he defended the title against the British Bulldog, is one of my favorite Bret Hart matches of all time as well. So he has got some masterpieces out there, especially in his first couple of title runs that he had. I even like Bret Hart as a heel. He made a great heel. That Hart Foundation versus United States angle that they did in the summer of 1997 was one of the most unique things we have ever seen in the wrestling business. For a group of guys to be baby faces in one country and heel in another, how the hell do you even pull that off? And it was one of the most intense times I can remember on WWE. That was during the summer. I remember those hot summer nights living down in North Carolina, turning on Monday Night Raw, going to a lot of these shows as well if they were in my neck of the woods, and watching the intensity on those summer Monday Night Raws during the height of the Hart Foundation versus United States feud. You could feel and see the tension. You could cut it with a knife, as they say. And it was such a dramatic, intense time in the WWE, and I loved it. Bret Hart was such a good heel because he made you believe that what he was saying is true, because he was right about a lot of what he was saying back then, and he was still a heel anyway, and that made me love Bret even more. Basically, I was a heel fan for that year. I continued to support Bret Hart during 1997 in his heel run, just as I did at the height of his babyface run in the early 90s. I was more on a Bret Hart bandwagon than I had ever been during that time, and I loved all that stuff they were doing with Owen and Davey Boy and Jim and Brian Pillman and everything. It was great stuff. And so you can imagine how devastated I was when November rolled around and Bret Hart got screwed in the Montreal Screwjob, and the most infamous thing to ever happen in wrestling. Bret Hart was the victim of all of that, and much like what happened with Randy Savage in 1994, it completely broke my heart. The last thing in the world I wanted to see was Bret Hart, a WWE guy, somebody that much like Savage represented so much of the WWE, they're jumping and going to WCW. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was Vince's fault. Vince is the one that wanted it to happen. Bret Hart didn't want to drop the belt. Both sides were wrong in a lot of ways, but both sides were justified in wanting what they wanted as well, and it's just a fucked up situation, and I hate that it happened to Bret Hart. I hate that his relationship with the WWE imploded like that. He punched Vince McMahon backstage, a guy who had been like a second father to him. It was just awful, and you really didn't see it coming. You had no idea that that was going to happen. And then, of course, Bret Hart going to WCW, what is there to say about that? Nothing. They literally did nothing with him. Bret Hart's career and run in WCW was horrible. They missed so many opportunities to capitalize on the hottest wrestler in the world. And by the time he finally did win a world title over there, WCW was basically on its way out of business anyway, and it wasn't even that big a deal. And it was just sad. And it got even worse. In 1999, Owen Hart died. Then in 2002, Davey Boy died. Bret Hart suffered a stroke after that. The family had been divided, and everything that I loved and admired about Bret Hart and the Hart family seemed like it was crumbling right in front of me. Stu and Helen both died shortly after that as well, and it was turning into this huge tragedy. Luckily, things have looked up a little bit. Bret Hart repaired his relationship with WWE, came back and worked with Vince McMahon. He said that one of the reasons why he came back to the WWE is because Vince called him when he was in the hospital suffering from the stroke. Called him to check on him, and then after that, he came back and got inducted into the Hall of Fame. They did the DVD on him. And then a few years after that, he actually returned to the ring, patched things up with Shawn Michaels on Monday Night Raw. The two of them actually kind of reconnected and even did a DVD together talking about their history and their rivalry. Both parties did their best to patch everything up, so that was really good to see. Present day Bret Hart doesn't give a shit. He still is on good terms with the WWE, I guess, but I'm surprised that he is, because every time he's in an interview, he just buries Stephanie and Triple H, and Bret Hart gives absolutely zero fucks, which is partly what I like about him. Even though I don't agree with everything he says, there's a lot of times that Bret Hart speaks and I'm like, yikes, Bret, you were a little bit full of shit right there. But you know what? That's okay, because I'm not talking about Bret Hart the person, I'm talking about Bret Hart the wrestler. And me sitting down and watching a classic Bret Hart WWE wrestling match, well, that's my spirit animal. It's my happy place. It takes me back to a much different time in life and in wrestling, and when things were just a little bit simpler than they are today. And I'll never forget the impact Bret Hart had on me as a wrestling fan. I don't even know if I would be a wrestling fan had it not been for Bret Hart. He touched me in a lot of ways, and even though I've said that I really don't have favorites, Bret Hart is the one exception to that rule. I always loved his work, I always cheered for him to win, and I always had his back in storylines no matter what he was doing. The only reason I bought a Winged Eagle replica belt is because Bret Hart once held that title. I owe a lot of who I am as a wrestling fan to the excellence of execution. His career meant the absolute world to me. So there you have it. That concludes the list of my top 10 favorite wrestlers of all time. So I'd love to hear some of your memories. If you liked anybody that I talked about here and you have memories of your own, feel free to share them in the comments below. We've got some pretty awesome names on this list and a countless amount of matches and memories to look back on. So thank you so much for listening to episode 400. My next two special episodes are scheduled to be a Royal Rumble review coming up right before the Royal Rumble 2017, and my WrestleMania Memories re-upload will be up in mid to late February, so keep a lookout for that. If you are listening to this commentary after those dates pass, then I'll put a link right there on the screen for you. Thanks again to everybody out there for all your awesome support. It's been a fun 400 episodes, and here's to 400 more. I will talk to you in a few days. Until next time, peace.